Alright, so these vlogs aren't going to be 100% accurate in terms of when each episode starts and ends because the book is unclear, and I tweeted to Christy Golden that, can you please mark it up? And she said you can't look at it that way, and, it doesn't follow that. And, again, I'm not going to falter for that. I mean, her goal is to make this feel like a cohesive story, not a bunch of episodes thrown together into one book. So, I'm, again, not going to falter for that. So I'm going to do the best I can. But I think it's kind of obvious where some of the rough area of where these episodes start, and I might be off by a bit or two, but I think it's pretty good. So, without further ado, let's get into this episode. This is the mission. In this episode, Ventress and Vaz go on several bounty hunter missions together. Vaz is getting encouragement from Obi-Wan to speed up the operation, get to Dooku. And the main mission that they go on is they basically have to help the Pikes rescue their son from the Black Suns. And that's more or less the episode. I mean, I read a bit ahead, but I feel like after the mission is a good stopping point. But yeah, really solid episode overall. I love the opening of this. First off, I mean, this entire episode is really good in terms of establishing the characters and where everyone's at and how the characters are progressing. That's the thing. It's not just Ventress and Vaz doing stuff together, which is a thing Rebels, I think, tends to do. Is they'll go on missions, but they won't really reflect the character or how they're growing and developing. Dark Disciple, it's always reflecting that. And it never comes more clear than just the interactions between Ventress and Vaz. This is my one. For as much as I liked some of the arcs that we've gotten in Clone Wars in the past, like Bad Batch, I don't feel like the characters particularly grew, whereas here we do. For one thing, the bit where Ventress and Vaz are training, there was so much good character stuff that got revealed through that. For once, I liked seeing Ventress be the master, not the pupil. That was a very clever turnaround, unique. And it was interesting to see how Dooku's teachings rubbed off on her. We had Ventress being this sort of brutal, tough coach that, in a sense, that's what Dooku was like for her. And it's interesting to see that play off on her. It also kind of reminded me of Whiplash, of how, just this brutal relentlessness from the push-ups to Ventress fighting Vaz. And there was also an amusing bit of comedy. I liked Ventress pretending to flirt. And, some of this flirt, it's, there's certain things in this novel, I wonder if this is, because Filoni said there's certain adult stuff that we were able to do in a novel that we couldn't do in the show. I wonder if this is, one of them, because it gets particularly, dirt sexual, and I'm like, would they have done this if this was in the show? But yeah, I really like the concept of the Banshee. I think it's a great setting. It feels like Filoni trying to go back to some of the early ideas he had for the Clone Wars. Originally, it was going to be about a bunch of people flying around the galaxy in a ship, like the Millennium Falcon. But then he scrapped that, and he tried to do that with the Twilight, but then it dissolved. So I wonder if the Banshee is his way of doing that. Because he's sort of doing that with Rebels and the Ghosts. I wonder if the Banshee was just sort of his way of doing that. Because a lot of this arc so far has been Ventress and Vaz just flying around the galaxy doing various missions. Kind of like what the Ghost does. And I'm really excited that we're going to get to see the Banshee on Rebels, although it'll probably unfortunately have a different owner and different... So, I was first a little bummed that I felt where we were going to sort of gloss over the missions Ventress and Vaz are going on. We weren't getting to see them, but, I mean, it is a clever way of montage. We go through time, we see the important thing, which is where the characters are at and how they react to it. And also, it's a good way of, you sort of need to go through time to help us get a better sense of the characters. And, again, the characters are the heart of the story, and I think cutting to the aftermath in this case is a good way to sort of keep it character-focused. And we do get a big mission later on. I really enjoy the conversation Ventress and Vaz have on the Banshee. It's a nice character briefing mode. I like seeing them get drunk. I wonder if that's another one of those things that was like they couldn't do this on the cartoon, but because it's a book, they could sort of get away with it. Like it was very amusing, and it also led to some really deep stuff because I mean the characters were a bit more honest to each other. Like I like the idea of Vaz doesn't really have any story. It kind of reminds me of Rango, like where Rango's taken on so many identities that he never really thinks about who he is, and I feel like Vaz is a similar way. Like he's done so many undercover missions and so many alternate identities that he's never really thought about who what is Vaz really like, who is Vaz really is, and I feel like that's part of the arc is that Vaz is going to be figuring out who he is. Yeah, like that whole conversation he had with Ventress is really deep. There's also some good moral ambiguity here with the Jedi, like, sort of using Ventress to fulfill their means, and it does sort of, like, put the Jedi in sort of, like, it does. Again, the show's been also reinforcing how, always doing a really good job of reinforcing how the Jedi aren't perfect. Like, sometimes they do things that can be called into question, and Confused Matthew did a review on the prequels, and he's constantly like, what kind of Jedi are these? Truth, Guardians of Truth and Justice, my butt. Well, he said something else, but and while it's true, and the show does it, but what I like about the show is that they're very self-aware. Like they'll do stuff, but the show's like intentionally like they're not perfect. Whereas the prequels, like they don't seem to be aware of how imperfect the Jedi are, and it's just setting up this idea of why people would be keen to mistrust the Council. I really liked the mission to Mustafar. It was cool that we were going to go back to Mustafar. I'm going to assume we were going to see a different part of Mustafar than we'd seen previously. It seems like we'd see a bit more of a town civilization. Interesting to think that there's people who just live on Mustafar and aren't mining. And I like how it didn't like just be. I mean, it was a fun mission from Ventress flirting with the guards to some cool action set pieces, but it always felt character driven. Like we got to learn more about the characters. Like it was interesting to see Ventress reflect on the bounty hunter episode from season 4 and how she saw herself sparing that little girl as a moment of weakness. Because it seems like, because I always assume that everything Ventress does is sort of her redeeming herself in a way. And like especially like the fact that she's sort of leaned away from killing people despite what it may make the mission easier. They're clearly going for a romance between Ventress and Vaz, which I like. Like I like how natural it's progressing. Like Ventress, she kind of reminds me of Jack from Mass Effect, where she's afraid to open herself up because you're raping her, and there's this just sort of natural rejection, but you can tell there's also this softer side to Ventress, and it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. But again, I like how they're taking the time with these characters, and again, it's not so much about taking down Dooku as about evolving these characters. It's a circumstance to help flesh out the characters. And about Ventress and Vaz figuring out who they are. I like seeing the Pike, how we have an innocent Pike family being kidnapped. Because the Pikes, we've sort of seen them in a criminal, some not so nice Pikes, some criminal Pikes. So it's nice to see the show reinforce the concept of how not everything's black and white. There are good people on both sides. Not all this one particular race are evil. There are some innocent people. It's weird though seeing the Pikes and the Black Suns at war, because if I recall correctly, aren't they both working for Darth Maul at this point? I mean, it could just be a continuity issue, but again, I'm really liking where this arc is going so far. It's again like it's about the characters, which is very nicely fleshed out from the dialogue these two share to the wonderful introspection of Christy Golden. And to her compliment, everything about even all these episodes feel very fleshed out and fully realized in a way that the comics didn't. Like the comics, I always felt like I was just getting like the main beats, but I wasn't really delving into the characters. Here, Christy Golden's really taking her time to fully realize all these stories that were being told of her, and it's creating a much richer, more satisfying story. Like I was worried like that she was gonna have to condense stuff to get this on novel, and to some extent it feels like that's what she's doing, but so far it feels very complete and very fully realized, and like it feels like the next best thing. So yeah, that's all I have to say on this episode. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, dislike, subscribe. This is JStar. If I'm correct, the next episode's the Separatist Ball, just looking at the concept art, which I'm really curious where that's going. But yeah, so I'll see you guys at the end of when I'm done with what I'm going to presume is the next episode. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments below. Like, dislike, subscribe, and this is JStar60. And until next time, may the force be with you. Take care.